Welcome to the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast. This podcast is completely dedicated to exploring Alaskan peaks, no matter the elevation, and connecting with the climbers and mountaineers who challenge themselves to summit them. Today, I sit down with Lane Christenson, one of the board directors for the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, and discuss his trip up Bashful Peak. Despite encountering some harsh conditions and having to make 2 pushes for the summit, Lane and his team ultimately bagged the climb, claiming the first winter ascent of Bashful Peak. Lane, welcome to the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast, man. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Heck yeah, man. We talked a little bit before we started, man, but you're definitely someone I've been wanting to get on this, even though it's the second episode. Thanks for supporting it, man. I'm super stoked to talk to you. Yeah, I've heard a lot about you through the community, specifically the Mountaineering Club of Alaska and kind of the cool stuff that you've done. Then, of course, I think the first time I saw your name was actually in the SCREE, which is the Mountaineering Club of Alaska's newsletter, and in your journey actually up Bashful Peak, which that's why we're here, is to talk about that summit, which we'll get into. So super pumped to have you on, dude, and looking forward to the convo, man, and getting to know you a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Cool, dude. So as I did, so my first episode, I kind of talked about like how you and I know each other, right? So again, providing a little bit of context to the listeners there. I think the first time you and I officially met was actually at the MCA, again, the Mountaineering Club of Alaska's executive committee, right? At Peter's house.
Yes, it was.
I saw you around, I think, at a few meetings, but I think officially that's when we met. So you are one of the board directors, right, of the MCA?
I am. Yeah.
How long have you been doing that?
So this is my second term. The first term was kind of weird because someone dropped off, so I was able to hop on for like 3 months, and then I had to get reelected. So now I'm starting my technically second term, and I'll be on it for another 2 years, I believe.
Okay, nice. Have you enjoyed the board director position so far?
Yeah, it's pretty fun to try to come up with these trips and the plan for the club future.
Yeah, nice. So what is just briefly, what is the role of a board director on specifically the MCA?
So number one, you're a voting member, so you can vote on the different proposals that comes up. There's some votes that have to be the members, but there's also votes that just have to be the board members. So I'm a voting member on that. And then it's kind of whatever. You can do whatever you want to do. You can help reach out. You can help with huts. You can help do community service. You can help lead different activities. You can help. I think technically my position is like the head of the social media committee.
Okay,
so
yeah.
We have an Instagram page. So you can kind of like just pick what you want to do and pursue that
Nice
idea.
Yeah, kind of the jack of all trades, right? Compared to like some of the executive positions like VP and treasurer and all that. So that's super cool, man. Yeah, and again, you've had a lot of exposure to the MCA, so again, maybe we'll chat a little bit more about that as well here later. Cool, man. Yeah, so again, super pumped. So before we get into, again, Bashful Peak, which we'll be talking to that specific peak today, the details on the route, how people can access it, and then obviously your journey up it, which I'm super pumped to hear about. Before we get to that, if you could, man, just go ahead and let the listeners know where you're from, your relationship to climbing and mountaineering, right? How you kind of got started with all that and what brought you here to Alaska.
Yeah, so my parents were military, so I was actually born down in Oklahoma, but then I've lived in Alaska pretty much since I can remember, since before kindergarten. So basically from Alaska. And I've always been really into outdoors stuff. I'm an Eagle Scout. Been doing that since first grade. Hunting, camping, fishing, all the Alaska stuff. But then starting about freshman year of high school, I really wanted to climb Denali, get into the Alaska mountains. So I talked to some people, kind of set a plan forward. So then I did some peaks like Kilimanjaro, Rainier,
Nice.
A little bit of Himalayan climbing to get ready for Denali. And then summer of junior year of high school, I was able to do Denali. And if you're not familiar with Alaska, the Chugach mountain range is kind of the big one right outside of Anchorage. So I started doing a lot of Chugach peaks in the time leading up to Denali and then post Denali. just doing a lot of those mountains. The Chugach Peaks are pretty cool because they range from anything like baldy, flat top that are super easy, hour-long day hikes to mountains that might take like 3 or 4 days round trip to get to and climb with a lot of technical skills. So you have a big range of peaks to choose from.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I love that mountain range, and same thing with me, kind of starting out in the mountaineering world, if you will. It's like it's in our backyard, right? Which is super cool. You mentioned Himalayan climbing, dude. What kind of
Yeah,
did you do out there?
I did a peak called Bashful Peak. So I have a friend. He was going to do Mount Everest, and there was a big group going with him. Some were climbing Everest, some were just going. So we went up to Everest Base Camp, which the altitude's about like 17,600 feet of base camp. And then there's a village it's actually called Bashful Village. That village is around 16,000 feet, and there's a peak. It's right near base camp, Everest Base Camp. And there's a peak that's about 20,300 feet. So pretty much the same height as Denali. And it's called Bashful Peak. And so we climbed that. And that was a really good experience of high altitude climbing. It's a little bit technical. It's kind of like the same terrain as Everest, just a bit shorter. It's like fixed line climbing. So that was a really cool peak. Get experience with the high altitude climbing that's a little more technical, because Kilimanjaro, it's just a hike. You're just walking. That one, you actually have to have crampons and use ascenders, do a little bit of rappelling. So it was a really good experience to get ready for Denali.
Yeah, that's sick, man. That's something I've always wanted to do. My brother and I actually go to Everest Base Camp. Right now, I don't know that I have a desire to do Everest, just because of how crowded it is really these days. But we'll see. That's super cool, man. How are your parents, right? Because you did a lot of this in high school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do your parents feel about that, man, of sending their kid out there doing some high peak stuff?
Well, at first, I think they're always nervous. I know that, I think eventually they kind of got used to it. But I know one kind of funny story is the first time I climbed Bashful Peak. I guess I was like summer of sophomore year or something in high school. And I told my mom, I'm going out to climb this mountain. It's going to be a long climb. I'd never climbed it before, but I knew it was hard.
Was it solo? Were you solo?
No, I went with a group of people.
Gotcha.
And I told her, I was like, it's going to be a long climb, just so you know. And she asked me how long it was going to take. I said, I don't know. So when she heard long climb, she was thinking like, a couple hours. So I woke up at like 3 a.m., left my house super early before they were awake. So she kind of thought I might be back by like 5 p.m. And then I didn't show back up until like 7 a.m. the next day.
Oh, man.
And she wasn't too impressed with that.
Did you at least have like an inReach?
Yeah, I had an inReach, so
okay.
I could text them and they could see where I was. But
yeah,
still.
Sweet. Yeah, that's funny, man. That's cool, man. Having parents that'll support that while you're in high school, man. I wish I had that opportunity, but living on the East Coast, really don't have too many crazy high peaks. So what was your first taste of, I assume you probably started climbing before you got into like the mountaineering, alpine-ish stuff, right? So like, what was your first taste of rock climbing or mountaineering?
So I'd say I actually probably did a little bit more mountaineering before rock.
Okay.
I guess so. My very first, anything mountaineering related. So I did Boy Scouts, and that's winter camping. But when I was like summer of freshman year in high school, my dad and I, we just went to Mount Rainier and just went up to Camp Muir and back.
Yeah.
So that's about 10,000 feet. And even though that's not like, we weren't trying to summit or anything, it was a little bit of taste of what a mountaineering trip is like. And then that same summer I did Kilimanjaro. So that was my first experience at high altitude. And even though it's just a hike, it's still really hard because you ascend so fast. I think we were up at from sea level to 19,300 feet in like 5 days. And that is just not really enough time, especially if you haven't had altitude experience before. So that was my first experience with like high altitude climbing. And then my first experience with technical climbing would probably be mountains in the Chugach or maybe Mount Rainier.
Okay. Yeah. Nice, man. Yeah, it's interesting to hear that you kind of started out, I guess, doing the mountaineering thing before getting into the more technical rock climbing, which most people that I've talked to, it's kind of just the opposite, right? They kind of start out, right, maybe doing some indoor gym time and then kind of working their way out and then getting into some bigger peaks, doing the mountaineering stuff. So,
Yeah.
which is super interesting. So I just got back from Hawaii for a work trip yesterday, and on the plane I watched The Alpinist. Have you seen that yet?
I've watched that quite a few times.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's such a good film about Marc Andre, right? Doing that solo stuff, and it kind of reminded me of you starting out so young and having your parents kind of throw you out there and start doing that stuff. So, are you into like doing a lot of solo stuff, and is that something you think you may get into in the future, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've done some solo stuff. Nothing super big. And yeah, I mean, it could be something in the future. It's a lot more dangerous.
Sure.
It's definitely nice to have other people with you. But I'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, right on, man. Yeah, I love doing solo trips, not necessarily big wall solo trips, but periodically I'll get up on the weekend and before the wife and kid get up and head out before sunrise and just bag a peak, man. It's super chill time for me.
Yeah.
So, well, cool, man. Yeah, that's good to hear. Kind of where you started and where you are now, and I'm sure you've got a lot of other stuff that you want to climb and bag, which we'll get into a little bit later as well. So let's go ahead and get right into Bashful Peak, man, that's one of the highest, if I'm not mistaken. Is that one of the highest in this range?
It's so the way the Chugach range works is there's the Chugach like mountain range, and
Right.
then that's massive. That goes super far back, and the tallest for that is Mount Marcus Baker at a little bit over 13.
Okay. Yep.
But generally, especially in the Anchorage area, when we talk about Chugach, we talk about the Chugach peaks inside of the state park boundary.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And there's a list for that. It's called the Chugach 120.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Bashful is the tallest peak of the Chugach 120. And it is the only peak that is above 8,000. I believe there's there's 14 7,000 foot peaks. And then Bashful is right at 8,005 feet.
Okay.
So it's the tallest and the only one above 8.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super cool, man. Yeah, and it's cool that you mentioned kind of the state park versus the actual mountain range, because I think that's interesting to know, and actually for the listeners to kind of understand that piece too, which is super interesting. Well, cool, man. Yeah, so let's talk about I'll kind of throw the ball in your court, man, and just talk to, if you could, your summit of Bashful and kind of right when you started, the time of day, the access, how you got to. I guess, the trailhead, if you will, right? Which, if I'm not mistaken, you have to start at a Clutna Lake area, right?
Yes.
And then kind of work your way up. So I'll throw the ball in your court, man. Just kind of talk about that summit day.
So yeah, first, before that, I'll just get into a little bit about my experience with this peak.
Yeah.
So this mountain, there's kind of Bold and Bashful. Those are the two peaks that they're really well known. Bold because it's a pretty relatively straightforward, easy peak to climb, and it's in the 7,000 foot peak list. And then Bashful because it's the tallest. And as far as the Chugach peaks go, it is pretty accessible. It's still super hard climb, but it's not like some where you have to glacier travel to get there or anything. And so I had first climbed Bold and Bashful in the same summer a while back. Bold was straightforward. Bashful was really hard. We got bad conditions, and I think it took like 26 hours or something to climb it. And so that was, I think, probably my first experience with like a super long summit day.
Yeah.
And then I didn't really even think I was going to climb Bashful again ever, because it was kind of sucky and a long day and probably a little bit dangerous with the snow, because it even though we did it in July, it snowed up there. And then I wanted to do Bold Peak in the winter. So I believe the next winter, some friends and I, we did like kind of the north face, which is not the normal climbing route, and then hooked in with the northeast ridge, and we were able to summit Bold Peak in the winter. And we looked over at Bashful. We're like, man, that thing looks super cool in the winter. Like, that'd be amazing to climb it. So then, even though we thought it would be pretty impossible, 2 weeks later, we actually went back and tried it. Unfortunately, they got a bunch of snow the week prior, and it was extremely hard. I mean, we were trail breaking. It was just super deep snow, and then the avalanche conditions were too high. So we had to bail, and we did not summit Bashful on that trip. And then the same group of friends, I believe, we went up and did Bashful in the summer again. And the whole way up, I don't think they had summited Bashful before, but the whole way up, I kept pointing out, like, this is how we do it in the winter if we wanted to go back. And they were kind of like, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen after seeing it in the summer. And then, then at that point, I had summited it twice. And so as winter went on this past year, it was, I guess we summited in 2024, 2023, 2024 winter. I started to get a team together to go climb this peak. So we got 5 people. I got 5 people together, and which was a little bit difficult to find people at first, and then we got a big group together, so that was cool. And then, so starting out this peak, you have to hike about 10.5 miles around Eklutna Lake, or you can snow machine. And with people's work schedule and how hard the climb already was, we didn't have the time to hike it in or anything. So originally we were going to take my friend's ATV with tracks out there, but like 2 days before the trip, it broke.
Of course.
So we found this $200 snow machine on Facebook Marketplace, and we used it. It wasn't really meant for it, but we were able to get us all around the lake successfully.
Nice. I remember seeing, you posted something on YouTube regarding the trip, and I remember seeing the snow machine, and it didn't look in the best condition, but you guys got it out there, right?
Yeah, surprisingly, it actually still runs. I was riding it the other day.
Nice.
But so yeah, now starting on summit day, we hiked in. So you start at the Bold and Bashful kind of trailhead, and then it's an unmaintained trail, so it's not great. And then we hiked in along that river there for about 1.5 miles, and we camped right at the base where you turn off to Stivers Gully. And at this point, the trailhead for Bold and Bashful is still the same trail.
Okay.
So we camped just barely into it, 1.5 miles, no elevation gain up, just camping. And then we woke up at 3 a.m., I believe, probably started climbing by 4 a.m. And then you take the trail up to Stivers Gully, which is where, if you want to do Bold, you would just keep going up, straight up that gully. And then we crossed over, and then you hit this part. They call it the Alder Tunnel. In the summer, it's like super bad bushwhacking. But if you can hug the cliff, you can kind of find what they call a tunnel and make it up without bushwhacking. In the winter, you don't have that problem because you're on top of the alders. It's still hard because you're trail breaking, but it's different. And then you go up and you cross this glacial moraine up there from this dead glacier. There's still ice underneath, but it's all rock on top. And that's where there's a part called the grass ramp of the climb. And the grass ramp had just a massive cornice. So instead of going up the grass ramp, we went up a little bit to the left. The way we went up to the left, people have done that in the summer, but I would not recommend it. Everyone I've talked to who's tried to do that in the summer says it's the worst decision they've ever made because the rock is really, really bad. It takes so much longer, but in the winter, I think it's the way to go. And then we eventually, from that point, we were able to get onto the West Ridge, and that's how you climb Bashful, the standard route. It's been climbed from a couple other aspects, but 99% of the people who do it from the West Ridge.
Okay, because there is an actual Bashful Peak trail, right? If I'm not mistaken, or is it?
I mean, kind of.
Okay.
You can kind of make out a trail, but it's not maintained or anything.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it's pretty easy to get off the trail. Gotcha. So it's nice to have GPS or something. And another thing I'll bring up, probably should have brought it up earlier, but since I'd already tried to do this peak in the winter, I kind of knew what I was going into. I definitely knew what I was going into. And I knew it was going to be a really hard climb. So with us, we had pretty heavy backpacks because we had the ropes, the technical gear, but we also had a stove with us. We had, if you've heard of it before, a wind sack, which is kind of like a bivvy thing.
Yeah.
We had enough stuff because I knew that there's a high chance you'd have to spend the night up there or something. So I think one guy brought their sleeping bag, and the rest of us kind of brought our Denali summit gear. So the same gear you wear on the summit of Denali, so it's extremely warm. So we knew we wouldn't have a huge problem with cold or anything.
Sure.
So then going back to the climb, from the West Ridge, we just started going up the ridge. And at the beginning, it's like steep, but there's nothing super hard. And I think we got super lucky with the snow conditions because, at least compared to previous years, there's a lot less snow in certain spots. So I think it did make it a lot easier. Although there were some places there was waist deep snow. The real climbing, it got hard around 6,000 feet. That's where it starts to get a little bit more scrambly, where you're having to use your hands. And that got really difficult with the snow.
Sure, yeah.
And the way it was, the snow made the ridge a lot more narrow. So then I think around 6,500 feet, it got quite narrow. And at this point, we'd already been climbing for a really long time because we started at probably up the mountain at 4 a.m. and it was already getting close to being dark at this point. So we climbed the whole day. It's very slow climbing, especially with the heavy packs. There's kind of a hard balance because some people can go really fast and they wear a super light backpack. The problem with that is if you need to use the stuff, then, it's less safe. So there's kind of a balance. And we were definitely on the heavy side of that balance where, in our case, it was a good thing we had it because I think I used everything in my backpack,
Nice.
but we were definitely a lot heavier and less efficient than if you went up with 1 liter of water and just planned to just go as fast as you can, like some people do. So it took us all day. And at this point, the ridge kind of gets into this knife edge ridge you have to cross. So you kind of have to straddle it. In the winter, at least, we had to straddle it with kind of your legs on either side and go across. And there's quite a few thousand feet drop off on either side. That's where we broke out the ropes. I went across it and then got a rope out. Was kind of able to belay people across. It wasn't the best because even though I was belaying across, there wasn't great anchors to tie into on the other side. So it was kind of one of those things where if someone fell, you'd have to go to the other side of the ridge and kind of catch them or do something like that. So even though we were belaying, it still wasn't great and definitely a no fall zone. And then that kind of brings it to the crux of the route. And that's Chicken Shit Gully. So that gully, it's about a 200-foot gully that brings you up to the 7,000-foot mark on the mountain. And after that, it's pretty straightforward climbing, but that is kind of the hardest part in the summer. Pretty much everyone who does it will rappel that gully. I think a couple people will try to down climb it, but most people bring ropes for that gully.
You said it's about 200 feet? Okay.
Yeah. So that one was pretty hard because there's so much snow in it and it's quite steep. I don't know, maybe 70 degrees, maybe more in some small places, but there was so much snow that kind of funneled in. It was really hard to actually climb up that gully. It was like you're trying to swim going up that gully almost. But I actually made it up that gully really fast. The unfortunate part is when I started up that gully, it was sunset. It was actually pretty beautiful. It was this golden hour. You could see the sun. And then within 30 minutes, it got dark and then it turned into an absolute whiteout where you really couldn't see, especially since it was dark and you're trying to use your headlamps, you couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of you.
Yeah.
And so it did take a while. I feel like I led the gully pretty efficiently. But then I brought the ropes up and then I kind of tied them at the top to make a fixed line type thing for the other guys to climb up. So they were able to use either their hands or micro tractions or prussics or whatever and ascend the rope. So it was a little bit easier and quicker for them to get up than just soloing the gully.
So you found a good spot then to tie the rope.
At the top of that gully, there's a super good spot. There's usually already the webbing around the rock up there. You want to make sure it's safe, but there's a lot of it up there.
Gotcha.
And so yeah, that is one really fortunate thing. There's this just perfect horn right at the top of that.
Nice.
So I got that rope set up, and it did take quite a while to get everyone up there, just because it's some hard climbing, and you gotta clip in to the rope or do whatever you're doing and get up there. Then we got up to the top, and at this point the storm was super bad. And so we decided, originally we were thinking we might bivvy at the top of that gully or something. But the storm was really bad, and we are kind of worried about avalanche conditions. As it turned out, it didn't make them as bad as we thought it was going to, because I don't know how much like actually accumulation of snow there was. It might have more just been like a lot of blowing snow,
Sure.
but it's hard to tell when you're in that whiteout. And so I know it was filling in the gullies super fast. Like you'd make a footstep, and then a couple seconds later it'd just be totally filled in. So then we decided we were going to try to go like hit the summit real quick and try to get down as fast as we could. And mind you, after the gully, the route isn't hard. It's really straightforward. You have 1,000 feet of like pretty easy climbing. It's not like, a lot of times people even drop their packs at the top and just go up with nothing. It's not hard. Maybe like a little bit of like scrambling, but really not bad. And I had already been up there 2 times before, so I felt like,
Right.
oh, we should be able to get this pretty easily. But we started going up, and the way it was dark, and then with this storm, you just really couldn't. It didn't even feel like the same mountain. Like it felt like a totally different mountain. And then we were getting in these gullies, which I don't even remember there being in the summer.
Yeah.
And then like the snow was kind of like sloughing down. Like they're kind of too steep and not enough snow for true avalanche, but it's kind of like that alpine slough avalanche. It's not
Yep.
going to like knock you off the mountain, but it's still not great. And we were more worried about the avalanches lower on the mountain. The stuff we had came up, we didn't want to have to go down and then get caught in an avalanche or something. So we made it like 500 feet from the top, and then we actually turned around to go down because we're like, it's too dangerous to go up. We're going to have to go down and just maybe try again another year, or we're just not going to be able to summit. And so that's kind of a bummer. But we got back down to the top of that rappel area, and I know if you look at the YouTube video I have on it, there's videos of it. The wind was just blowing so hard that you couldn't really see.
Yep.
And we didn't feel like it was safe to go across that West Ridge, because it was quite technical, the West Ridge area. We didn't feel like it was safe to try to like navigate down that in this whiteout. So then we decided we're just going to bivvy at the top and wait for daylight and hope it got better. We kind of like talked about the avalanche conditions, because a couple of us, we've taken the avalanche courses and stuff.
Sure.
So we figured out probably the safest thing was going to be to bivvy up there, which was really cold. But like I said earlier, we were smart and brought the right gear.
How long did you guys have to bivvy it up?
So what happened was we went in, like we had this wind sack. One guy was in his sleeping bag in like a military bivvy, and then 3 of us were in this wind sack. And what happened was me and 2 other guys in there, we were probably in there for like an hour or something, or maybe not even, maybe like 30 minutes. And it was just super cold. And even though we had the warm gear, I was kind of cold, and it was like moist in there, because the wind sack, it's kind of just like a glorified trash bag. It doesn't breathe or anything.
Yeah.
And so eventually I told my one friend, Caden, I was like, let's go try to like summit again, because it's not like we're wasting daylight or anything. We're waiting for the daylight, and it'll warm us up or whatever. So then we were only probably in the wind sack for a little bit, and then we went and tried it again. And it took a really long time, because at that point it was probably midnight when we started out to try to go summit for the second time. And it was just the 2 of us went out and tried to do it. And we eventually made it to the top. It took a long time to navigate through there in the dark and everything, but we did make it to the top.
Nice.
And we made it to the top. It was like 4 or 5 a.m. by the time we made it to the top. Although I was a little confused at the time, but then looking back, we found out it was daylight savings time, so it added an hour.
Gotcha.
Somewhere in there. So it took us maybe like 3 hours to get to the top, which is way long. Normally it takes like 45 minutes, if that, in the summer. But there's a lot of route finding. So it was really cool to get to the top.
Yeah.
I think we took like 2 pictures. I mean, it's dark. You can't even tell where it is. And then we went back down to our bivvy spot where the other guys were. And then at that point, it was almost getting light out. We melted some water with the stove. We actually had some like freeze-dried meals we brought with us, because we expected we'd need them. So we ate some stuff, and then at that point it actually cleared up. Like the storm just lasted from sunset to sunrise, and then right as the sun came out, it cleared up, and it was actually a really nice day, although it was extremely cold.
Yeah.
Um, and then the way down was pretty uneventful. It was actually quite easy. We did the rappel, and then there was some slightly harder sections in the ridge, but I actually found going down in the winter to be easier than going down in the summer. In the summer, there's a lot of this really hard rock, and it's really hard on your knees and everything.
Oh, yeah.
To try to walk down this because it's steep. The rock is super unstable. One thing I don't think I've mentioned is Chugach rock. That's kind of a term that you use here in Alaska, and it's basically just super bad rock. You can try to like grab onto a boulder and it might just split in half. This rock is really brittle.
Yeah, I experienced, or my buddy and I experienced that on Pioneer Peak, the rock up there for sure.
Yeah, and so going down in the summer is really hard on your knees. You're on this like scree that's trying to slip out from under you. In the winter, there were some difficult parts, but I found it really easy to be able to just like plunge step down and go down the peak. I mean, I guess it's comparatively easy to going up it, so maybe it wasn't extremely easy, but I found it to be really nice. Although it did take all day. I mean, we started hiking at sunrise, and then we made it back down to our like base camp area with the tents. I don't remember exactly what time we made it back there, but I know by the time we packed up the tents, because we decided we weren't going to try to spend a night there. One of the reasons was our blisters on our feet were so bad, we didn't want to like take off our mountaineering boots and have to put them back on the next morning and re-hike. So we figured we might as well just like push through and do another 1.5 miles to get back to our snow machine. And by the time we got the tents packed up and everything, we got back to the snow machine. It was dark. And then it took a while to start the snow machine because it's not great. It doesn't even have a pull start. So we had to like pull the clutch and try to spin it. And then, so yeah, at that point, other than like the little bit of sleeping that we did at the top of the bivvy, we'd been going for about 48 hours.
Wow.
Maybe a little less. I think it was like 48 hours by the time I got back to my house in my truck. But yeah, it was about 48 hours of straight going.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, that's a long time. And we'll probably talk to that actually here shortly once we get into like the mental piece of it. But a few things I'll actually want to revisit, man, is first is how many miles do you think you guys did from like the start of, because you park, right? Kind of going back a little bit further, you park at the Clutna Lake kind of parking area, right?
Yeah.
So how far do you think it was from there to the summit and back? Like, did you guys hack that mileage there?
I don't think so. I didn't, at the time, I didn't have like a good Garmin smartwatch that would last the battery the whole time, so I didn't track it. It's actually not as many miles as you'd think. Bashful's pretty steep a lot of the time, so it's really not that many miles. Maybe like, so from like not including the way around the lake, from the trailhead to the summit and back, it might only be like, guessing maybe 12 miles round trip.
Okay.
That's a guess, just thinking back to it.
Gotcha.
Somewhere around there. It's not a super high mileage day, but there's not a single easy mile. It's all like pretty hard. It might even be less than 12 miles, but it's you're either bushwhacking through really thick stuff, or you're on bad Chugach rock, you're going up a steep ridge. So yeah, the mileage isn't really what does it. It's the trail breaking through deep snow, and then pretty much every step is a pretty big incline.
Yeah. That's crazy, man. I honestly didn't, because I've seen videos on Bashful before, and I honestly didn't realize how technical it was, right, in some portions of the hike.
Yeah, so I mean, it is technical. There's definitely more Chugach peaks that are more technical than it is.
Yeah.
But the winter kind of makes it hard just because of the certain aspects of it. I'd say like in terms of the Chugach peaks, it's probably like it probably draws the line from like a hike up to a more climb. There are peaks that are more technical than it is. Like I did Bella Coast this past summer, and that's definitely a step up. You got to do some glacier travel. There's a little bit more exposed climbing.
Sure.
And then there's Baleful, which is a lot more technical. But yeah, Bashful, it's definitely not an easy peak.
Yeah. That's super cool. Another thing I want to revisit that you mentioned I thought was interesting was because you've climbed Bashful how many times so far now? You
So
said
now I've successfully summited 3 times.
3 times. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say like each time you've gone, it's almost felt like a different mountain because of the overall conditions, which I think is super cool.
Yeah.
And interesting. Have you experienced that in like other peaks that you've done in the Chugach?
I'm trying to think.
Where like you would climb, for example, right? I climbed Pioneer Peak not too long ago, and obviously it's a brutal hike there. But conditions weren't that bad. It was super muddy, but it'd be interesting to climb that during like hard winter just to kind of see what it would be like. But yeah, same thing, right? I feel like it would almost feel like a completely different summit for the most part.
Yeah, a lot of those peaks do feel totally different in the summer versus the winter.
Yeah, it's super interesting to hear that perspective. Well, awesome, man. Yeah, super detailed on your route and your experience up there. One thing I want to talk about is the gear. What gear, for those that may want to do Bashful, what gear would you recommend that's absolutely vital that you take with you on a Bashful summit?
In the summer, you mean?
I guess both, right? So summit versus the winter.
Yeah, so I mean, it really depends on what type of climber you are. I think there's some guys who's done it in like a running vest and just do it extremely fast. It depends on how comfortable you are. If you're super comfortable with exposure, you can do it in trail runners, and I'd say a helmet is probably still necessary no matter who you are because of natural rock fall.
Yeah.
But some people do it without ropes, and you can, if you're a trail runner, you could almost run up it if you're in super good shape. For the average person, I'd say ropes are pretty nice to have. You could down climb the gully, but that's pretty sketchy. So I'd say for the normal climber, ropes, a lightweight harness. You don't need anything super cushiony. It's only 200 feet and it's not totally vertical, with some sort of rappel device. Like I said earlier, helmet is probably 100% necessary no matter who you are, just because of the natural rock fall trying to go up the gully and everything.
Right.
And then having enough water in the summer on a hot day, the water is important. And it's not like you can really, there's no streams or anything up. Like on Bold, the whole way up, you're kind of going up this gully where there's a stream. On Bashful, you're on this ridge, and you might find some snow melt, but you got to make sure to have enough water.
Sure.
And then maybe like a lightweight bivy is pretty nice to have is if you're planning on going a little slower. I know I've read so many trip reports where people, even in the summer, end up bivvying up there. It seems like almost every other person that tries to climb it ends up bivvying on the ridge. I think a couple people have bivvied in the summer in the same place we did in the winter.
Wow.
Just because even though summer, the night is a lot shorter than we had, you hit night and like I said, you just kind of, even though it's straightforward, it feels like a different mountain.
Yeah.
So make sure you have rain gear, stuff that if you need to spend the night, because even in the summer, it'll probably get below freezing up there.
Yeah.
Enough food. And then I'd say the biggest thing is just go into it kind of knowing it's going to be a long day. Don't think you're going to try to do it in 6 hours or something.
Yeah.
Expect for an 18-hour day or maybe longer. I know it can be done quicker, but I just go in with the mindset it's going to take a long time.
Yeah. Did you guys bring any like pro gear for anchoring or anything like that, or did you guys just use? I know you mentioned earlier like kind of using slings around a horn or something like that.
Yeah, we did bring a lot of stuff. I don't think we really used it too much. We definitely used some sling to anchor around rocks and stuff.
Yeah.
I think we each had like 1 or 2 pickets with us, but we didn't end up using them. I've done a lot of Chugach peaks where I always bring pickets if it's in the winter or even summer glacier stuff. And I don't think I've ever used one actually, had the right conditions to use one, but it's something that's good to have.
Yep, just in case.
And then we brought like ice tools and stuff for our own climbing. And yeah, we definitely had the gear, but we didn't need to use it.
Yeah, nice, man. Yeah, like you said, it's always good to have that extra stuff. And I know when I do kind of my solo climbs here and there in the Chugach, my pack is always probably heavier than it really needs to be because I'm always, want to have the gear just in case, right? Just in case you need it versus not having it at all. So, any other like highs and lows or like memorable pieces of that climb? I know you talked about a few already of some funny stuff or some memorable stuff that happened, but anything else on that climb in particular?
I'd say that one of the big things that I always find with any climb is doing these alpine starts. It's always so hard to get going because you wake up with very little sleep, and then it's dark out, you're climbing, you're tired. And then as soon as the sun comes out, you kind of get a boost. So that's always really nice.
Yeah.
And on this trip, we had that happen twice because it went for 48 hours. So like every time it would go from nighttime to daylight, it was always like really nice. It would give you a boost. Caffeine was helpful. We had those little like 5-hour energies.
Yeah.
And those we found out from climbing that those actually help, although they don't actually last for 5 hours, it seems like. But that was like a little boost. And then I guess like it was kind of necessary, but having the food up there was kind of nice. And I guess the low was probably when we got hit with that storm, because I kind of knew bad weather was going to be coming in,
Mm-hmm.
but it was pretty crazy how we had super nice weather and then a beautiful sunny sunset. And then right as it got dark, the storm just hit. And so like you not only get hit with night, which sucks in general, but you get hit with a massive storm as well.
Right.
And so that was difficult.
Yeah. And another thing you kind of talked about too was making the decision to not summit, just based off of I think the conditions, right? Something I actually talked about during my first episode with John was him and I made the decision not to summit North Pioneer Peak, just because of the conditions. Like we couldn't even see the peak; we were socked in just from clouds. But yeah, I mean that decision making piece and like being humble when you're climbing is important, which I'm sure you know because you've got a little bit more experience. But making those good decisions, right, to turn around if you need to, and then you woke up the next day or after a few hours and went for a second push and bagged it, man, which is super neat.
Yeah.
So, well, cool, man. Yeah, thanks for sharing the detailed trip, man. And again, it's neat to hear that from your perspective versus just watching like the YouTube video. So
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting. If you find yourself still hungry for more mountaineering stories and networking, consider checking out the Mountaineering Club of Alaska, or MCA for short. Founded in 1958, the MCA is a nonprofit organization that is focused on promoting mountaineering, hiking, climbing, skiing, and the preservation of the outdoors and wilderness. The MCA is also active in promoting conservation, trail maintenance, and vital in preserving some of the mountaineering history and place names within Alaska. Additionally, they are the primary organization that manages and maintains 8 backcountry huts available to the public. If you would like more information about joining the club and or volunteering, visit the website at mtnclubak.org. So let's talk about briefly so part of this podcast, right, is kind of breaking out like the physical, mental, and spiritual piece of climbing. And I know you kind of hit a few things already specifically from the Bashful, but what can you talk to regarding the physical, mental, and spiritual piece of mountaineering in general? And you can even relate it back to Bashful if you want, but just in general, like, and you don't even have to talk about all 3 of them if you want to pick one of them to kind of focus on too.
Yeah, I'd say for me, so there's the physical and then mental. So with the physical aspect, that's being in shape.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of training that goes involved. I guess, for example, Denali, you got to be physically in shape to do this. But then also you could be in super good physical shape, but if you don't have the mental capacity, a lot of these peaks would be pretty much impossible.
Sure.
Because for a trip like Denali, it'll take usually anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. And on those 2 to 3 weeks, you're on a glacier the whole time, camping, and it up high, it might be -20 the whole time. When the sun comes out, it will feel a little bit warmer, but you'll be in this cold weather this whole time. And if you could have the physical ability, but if you don't have the mental capacity to wait out a storm for 10 days or whatever, that's when a lot of people I find don't summit mountains like Denali, just because they get tired of waiting and they want to go down. Day 10 rolls around on the trip or something, and they're like, well, I don't think we're ever going to get a chance to summit, and you go down. And one of the things I think about with those mountains is, as long as you don't get altitude sickness, as long as you go up slowly, like a mountain like Denali. There's a pretty low chance of getting hurt. That is the one thing that could cause failure. But as long as you go up slowly and don't get the altitude sickness, and then you have the mental capacity to wait it out, you're almost guaranteed to summit. A lot of it's the mental strength. And I think that also comes in to the physical aspect of training, being mentally strong enough to always go out and train even when you don't want to, go for a run when it's dark and cold out, or go for your nightly weighted climb up a mountain, even though you just got off work and you don't really feel like it. That really comes in with the training too.
Yeah, man. Yeah, training is crucial. And I know we talked a little bit before we started talking here, and you know, my plan and my team of training all of 2025, right? So taking the time to do that. Yeah, and you mentioned the mental piece, right? I can see where a lot of people get discouraged, especially on a high peak like Denali, of waiting, right? Waiting for that weather window, for example, and just getting discouraged after, you know, so many failed attempts. So, yeah, like you mentioned, right? Staying strong, and then making sure you have the time to do it, right? Which is important, and not a lot of people have that, but that's interesting. What about the spiritual piece, man? I'm always interested in hearing like why people climb, right? Like what drives you to climb. And I'll use the same example I used in my last podcast, right? Is Pioneer Peak, for example. You know, telling my wife of how much that climb hurt in terms of like my physical body. Like that's a long day too of doing Pioneer Peak. And she's like, why do you do it? And I'm just like, it's a passion, man, at least for me, and the challenge of it. So like, why do you climb, man? Like what's that spiritual piece that you want to go to?
Yeah. So for me, I just really like if you see a mountain and just like knowing you've climbed it, and just the whole way up, it just feels so cool to have like been to the top of this mountain. So I think it's really cool. The peaks you can see, unfortunately, there's not many places you can see Boulder Bashful from, because they're kind of in the depths of this mountain range. But like you were saying, Pioneer, I've climbed that one a couple times, and it's really cool because every time you drive to Wasilla or back from Wasilla, you can see it right there, and it's so big. And then also like the Front Range peaks, when you're driving into Anchorage, you can be like pointing out these peaks, and it's really cool to see a peak from the distance and then know you've been up there. And then also like, especially with peaks like Denali, these more famous peaks, it's really cool because in the training and the research and everything, like I watched probably every YouTube video out there on Denali and read a whole bunch of books on Denali. And it was really cool to actually be on this peak that you've heard all about. And there's the history from the first ascent attempts and all that. It's really cool to actually be on that mountain, and you've heard so much about it, and then you actually get to summit it. And it's just a really cool feeling to be at the top. And I think it's also, for me, the 7 summits or any of those tallest in the area peaks are really cool, because once you get to the top of Denali, and you're standing there, you're the highest point in North America. Same thing with Aconcagua was pretty cool when I did that one, because you're the highest point outside of the Himalayas. And so that's really cool to just like be up there, and you know that there's nothing higher than you. That's what I find really amazing. Yeah,
man, that's super cool. And yeah, you know, you mentioned just driving by and looking at a peak and just knowing that you've been up there. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, especially again, Pioneer Peak, because it's such a, in my opinion, such an epic looking mountain, especially coming in from Wasilla, right? Looking at that face. Going back to Anchorage is super cool. Yes, that's interesting to hear. So what's next for you, man? So I know we kind of talked about you're going to be doing another Denali push this upcoming year with some family members. And again, you've already done Denali before, but is there anything specific, any other peak, and it doesn't have to be, you know, higher than Denali, but is there anything specific that you're looking to summit soon?
So yeah, there's a couple plans I have. So like you said, I'm going with my sister, my dad, and then another person. We're heading back up just to do the Denali West Buttress here this climbing season. And then before then, so I'm starting to get into a little bit of ultra marathon running. So I did one 50-miler ultra marathon this past summer, And then I'm going to be attempting a 100-miler. We'll see. I've never done anything like that, so it's just going to be a totally new experience. I think it'll be a lot of the mental toughness, like I said earlier.
Sure.
But I'm just experimenting with that, trying it out. And then in terms of peaks, I'd like to do a lot more Chugach peaks this upcoming summer. I'll have to see how busy I am with college and stuff. I'll be doing stuff in the summer. But I do want to do, I haven't done Baleful yet, so that's one of my goals.
Okay.
And then a long-term goal that I have, it won't be anytime in the future, close future, but I'd really like to do Denali in the winter. That's one of my big goals, but that's a long ways out. I'm doing school in the winters and stuff, so it'll be many years from now. But that's one thing that I always have my sights on.
Nice. Do you have any desire or itch, like in the future, to do like a solo climb up Denali?
Yeah, I think that would be really cool to do a solo climb up Denali. There is a lot of risk involved in a solo climb. Just I guess the biggest thing is the crevasse fall danger. It's a glacier. I know I never fell in like super deep, but I did fall in quite a few crevasses on Denali. I guess none of the ones I fell in, like if I would have been unroped, I probably still would have been fine. I don't think I need to be pulled out of any. But they're definitely there. And I do know people who's fallen deeper into crevasses on the mountains. That it's definitely a little bit more dangerous. You just have to be a lot more careful about what weather you travel in, because the whiteouts and bad wind, they can kind of cover up crevasses. So there might only be an inch thick of like loose powdery snow, and you might just step right through it. So you got to be careful of the weather you travel in if you're going solo. But I do think it would be pretty cool to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I can't remember what book. Oh, maybe I can't remember what book it is in. I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it talked about Dave Staley doing his solo up Denali, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, so. I was talking to him about that the other day. I know there's a pretty good write-up in the American Alpine Journal about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems super amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. I said this last time on the first podcast, but Dave, when you do start listening to these, I want to get you on the podcast. So I've asked him a few times, and he's very politely not answered those questions. So Dave, I want you on the podcast, man. Cool, man. Yeah. So thanks for talking to that physical, mental, and spiritual piece, dude. Super interesting to hear that. Really last question I have for you before we kind of close up, and something I want to end with all the guests is just if you have like a favorite mountaineering or climbing quote that you kind of want to end with.
Yeah, so this was actually my senior quote in high school that I chose, and I think it's probably the most well-known one out there. It's "The mountains are calling and I must go," and that is by John Muir.
Nice, man.
Probably the most famous quote out there, I'd say, with mountaineering.
Yeah, heck yeah. What does that mean to you, man, when you hear that? You gotta go tomorrow, go climb.
Yeah, I just always think about, the next mountains. Like I was saying, I set these goals that I really want to do, and I'm just always thinking about them. Unfortunately, you can't always go. I'm in college and everything, so I'm pretty busy. But when I have the chance and everything, I really enjoy getting out there.
Yeah, man, it's definitely an addiction because I'm always ready to go every day if I could. So, well, cool, man. Lane, dude, I want to thank you for coming on, man. Again, being episode 2, being literally my second guest here. Again, I plan on doing 2 each month and releasing 2 episodes each month. So, looking forward to it. I appreciate you coming on, man, and hopefully you and I maybe can do some climbing in the future, dude. And but we'll be chatting.
Yeah,
thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, bud. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a few minutes to like, subscribe, drop a comment, or leave a rating on whatever platform you are using to support the podcast and to reach more current and aspiring mountaineers. As a reminder, if you would like to connect with other climbers, hikers, and mountaineers, consider joining the Mountaineering Club of Alaska at mtnclubak.org. Although mountaineering can sometimes be an individual journey and challenge in itself, there's also something very profound about talking and sharing those experiences with those alike. That's exactly why I started this podcast, to simply connect. This podcast has been produced by myself, and original music has been provided by Emberloom. I am your host, Sean Cordes. Thanks for listening and safe climbing.